Episode 1: The Gates That Never Opened. It was raining the night I arrived at St. Aurelia's. Not the gentle kind of rain that soothes you to sleep, but a cruel, endless downpour that seemed to fall from a sky that had forgotten mercy. The carriage stopped at the edge of the hill, wheels half buried in mud. The driver refused to go further. "I don't go past the gates," he said, his eyes never meeting mine. Then he crossed himself and whipped the horses away before I could ask why. And so I stood there, my black habit heavy with water, suitcase in hand, before the massive iron gates of the orphanage. They were taller than any church doors I had ever seen, carved with Latin words I didn't understand. Lightning flashed, and for a brief moment, I saw something carved beneath the rust, small handprints. Hundreds of them burned into the metal. When I pulled the bell chain, the sound that followed didn't echo outward. It echoed inward, as though the orphanage had a throat that swallowed the noise whole. A candle flickered beyond the bars. Then the gates groaned open, slow and reluctant, like a beast disturbed from sleep. Sister Miriam, I reminded myself. That's who I was now, sent by the diocese to assist Mother Agatha in tending to the children of St. Aurelia's. But the moment those gates closed behind me, I knew I hadn't entered a house of God. The smell struck me first: wax, mildew, and something metallic beneath it all. Blood, perhaps, or iron. The hallway was long and narrow, lined with portraits of children whose eyes seemed painted too real, too aware. Each face smiled the same strange smile, as if they all shared one secret. Mother Agatha greeted me at the end of the corridor. Her skin looked pale as bone under candlelight, her wimple starched into perfect stillness. "We don't often get new sisters," she said. "St. Aurelia's chooses who enters." "Chooses?" I asked, her lips curved faintly. "Not everyone finds us, Sister Miriam. Only those who are called." She handed me a brass key with the number 7 etched upon it and motioned toward the second-floor staircase. "Your room is ready. Curfew is at 9. Do not leave your quarters after the bell rings." When I asked why, she only said, "Because the children walk at night." I didn't sleep. The wind moaned against the windows, and from somewhere below I heard faint laughter, soft, playful, but wrong. The sound didn't come from children playing. It came from something mimicking them. At midnight, the bell rang 3 times. Footsteps shuffled in the corridor outside my door. I thought perhaps one of the children was lost, but when I opened it, the hallway was empty. Only the portraits stared back at me, their smiles now wider, their painted eyes gleaming wetly. And then I noticed it, the muddy footprints. Small, bare, leading down the stairs toward the chapel. I followed. Each step creaked as if it complained. The chapel door stood ajar, candlelight flickering within. Inside, 12 little chairs were arranged in a circle. Every one of them was occupied by a doll dressed in orphanage uniform. Their porcelain heads were cracked and each clutched a tiny wooden cross. A whisper rose behind me, childlike, trembling. "Sister, are you going to leave us too?" I turned, but no one was there. When I looked back at the dolls, one of them had moved. Its glass eyes stared directly at me. That was the first night I understood what the villagers meant. At St. Aurelia's orphanage, no child ever left. And maybe, just maybe, no nun ever did either. Episode 2: The Children Who Don't Remember. When morning came, the rain had stopped, but the world outside my window was wrapped in fog so thick it seemed to choke the sun itself. The orphanage grounds looked different by daylight, serene, almost holy, if you didn't look too closely. The ivy-covered walls hid the cracks, and the chapel bell swayed in silence, as if afraid to disturb something still sleeping beneath the mist. Breakfast was served in a long, echoing hall. The children sat in neat rows, 20 of them, maybe more. Their heads bowed in prayer, their hands folded perfectly. Too perfectly. They whispered their amens in unison, not a beat late, not a sound off. "Good morning, children," I said. My voice trembled more than I wished. Every head turned toward me at once. Dozens of pale faces identical in their emptiness. Then, as if someone had commanded them, they smiled. Thin, practiced, unnatural. A small girl at the nearest table stood. "Good morning, Sister Miriam." Her voice was soft, melodic, like a hymn. I asked her name. She tilted her head. "I don't remember." The girl beside her giggled, but there was no joy in it, just a hollow, rehearsed echo. None of us do, sister. Mother Agatha says names are for the living. The way she said living made my stomach tighten. Throughout the day, I tried to learn more. The children played outside in the courtyard, though played wasn't quite right. They moved through their games like actors repeating an old scene, over and over. Hopscotch squares drawn on the stone, but no chalk dust. Laughter that began and ended in the same rhythm every time. I asked one boy, "How long have you been here?" He frowned. "Always. And your parents?" He blinked. "They're waiting for me in the light." Then he smiled, as if proud of his answer, before skipping away. When I mentioned it to Mother Agatha, she nodded calmly. "Their memories are fragile, sister. It's best not to remind them of what was before." "Before what?" I pressed. Her eyes lingered on me too long. "Before they were saved." That night I dreamed of the children. They stood in the hallway outside my door, holding candles that burned blue instead of gold. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their lips moved, whispering prayers I didn't recognize. When I woke, my room reeked of candle wax and damp soil. I lit my lamp. The flame wavered, and then died. Something cold brushed the back of my neck. I turned and saw faint letters forming on the frost of my window pane. Words, written by a trembling hand from the outside. "We are still here." My heart pounded. I opened the door, but the corridor was dark and silent. The portraits along the wall looked different again, every face now weeping black streaks of paint. From below, I heard Mother Agatha's voice reciting the rosary. The sound was calm, steady, until the children's voices joined hers. Their chant grew louder, heavier, almost desperate. And just before the final amen, every candle in the orphanage went out at once. Something moved in the dark, whispering, "Don't forget us this time, Sister Miriam." When I struck a match, the hallway was empty again, except for a single small shoe, soaked in mud, left neatly outside my door. It was still warm. Episode 3. The Chapel Without a Cross. I spent the next morning pretending to pray, though God felt impossibly far away within those walls. The air inside St. Aurelia's was heavy, as though every breath had to pass through years of other people's confessions before reaching my lungs. The fog outside refused to lift, and even the birds, if there were any, stayed silent. After the strange night before, I went looking for the chapel. Mother Agatha insisted that all nuns must begin their days there. "It cleanses the spirit," she had said. Yet as I approached the arched doorway, I felt no cleansing at all, only a tightening in my chest, as though my soul recognized something before my mind did. The chapel was vast, candlelit, and wrong. The altar stood beneath a great stained glass window, fractured with time. Angels' faces had faded, leaving only shards of color that bled onto the floor like wounds of light. And above the altar, where Christ should have been, there was only empty space. No crucifix, no symbol of redemption. Just 4 rusted nails and the faint outline of where a cross had once hung. When I asked Mother Agatha later, her answer chilled me. "It was taken," she said. "Taken by whom?" "By those who couldn't bear to see him watching." Her tone ended the conversation, but not the questions that now clung to me like shadows. That evening, I found myself alone in the chapel again. The children were meant to be asleep, but faint footsteps echoed between the pews. When I turned, I saw little Gabriel, the mute boy who never smiled, standing near the altar, sketchbook in hand. He stared up at the empty space where the cross should be, then drew something quickly, his small hand trembling. I knelt beside him, trying to see the page. What he had drawn made my blood freeze. A man, tall, nailed to a cross. But the face wasn't Christ's. It was mine. Before I could speak, Gabriel pressed a finger to his lips, eyes wide with terror. Then he pointed to the stained glass window. Through the red and blue shards, I saw movement. Not outside, within. Figures, pale and thin, crawling behind the glass as though the window trapped something trying to get out. A sudden gust snuffed every candle. The darkness was complete, and the smell of burning wax filled my nose. I reached for Gabriel, but his small hand was gone. "Gabriel?" I whispered. My voice echoed back, distorted. "Gabriel?" Something answered, not him. A voice low and cracked, whispering from where the crucifix should be. "He was never crucified here." Lightning flashed, illuminating the altar for a heartbeat. In that instant I saw it, an inverted cross carved deep into the wood beneath the cloth. Blood, fresh, impossibly fresh, seeped from the grooves, dripping onto the floor. When the candles flickered back to life, everything was still again. The blood was gone. Gabriel was gone. Only his sketchbook lay open on the altar. I turned the page. The next drawing showed the orphanage from above, surrounded by a ring of fire. And beneath it, in childish handwriting, "He will return when the cross does." That night, I couldn't close my eyes, because somewhere in the dark I could swear I heard nails being hammered back into wood. Episode 4. The Boy in the Mirror. Morning light did little to comfort me anymore. It slipped weakly through the fog-stained windows, painting the walls of my room in a pale, feverish glow. I hadn't slept. Every time my eyes closed, I heard the hammering again. The sound of iron on wood echoing faintly through the orphanage, as if someone were rebuilding a cross that should never have existed. When I went downstairs, the children were gathered in the dining hall. Only one seat was empty, Gabriel's. I asked Mother Agatha where he was. She looked up from her tea, her expression unreadable. "Gabriel is resting," she said. "He often does that when he dreams too deeply." Her words left a chill in my stomach. Resting, the same word she'd used yesterday when I asked about another child who'd vanished overnight. I spent the day teaching the children hymns in the classroom. Their voices were soft, obedient, mechanical. But I noticed something strange. Every time I mentioned Gabriel's name, they paused mid-verse, eyes distant, as though the memory of him was slipping through their fingers. By afternoon, not a single one could recall what he looked like. But I could. The dark curls, the trembling hands, the way his sketches seemed to bleed secrets. That night I went searching for his room. The door was locked, though I don't remember locking it. When I finally forced it open, dust exploded into the air, and the smell of wet paper filled my lungs. His sketchbook lay open on the floor. The drawing showed a mirror, and in its reflection, me, standing exactly as I was now. I turned slowly toward the real mirror in the room. The glass was cloudy, warped by age. I saw myself, or what I thought was myself. But then she smiled, even though I hadn't. I stepped closer. The reflection's eyes darkened, the pupils expanding until the whites disappeared. Its smile grew wider, unnatural, stretching past what flesh should allow. My breath hitched. I raised my hand. The reflection copied me, until it didn't. Its hand stayed pressed against the glass. Then I saw something behind her. Behind me, Gabriel. His small face pale, his lips trembling. He mouthed something, but there was no sound. His eyes were wide, pleading. Before I could move, the glass rippled like water. A child's hand reached out and clutched my wrist. Ice cold. Real. I screamed and tore away, stumbling backward. The mirror stilled again. My pulse thundered in my ears, and for a moment I thought I'd imagined it. But then I saw it. One perfect fingerprint of a child, left on the inside of the glass. I ran to find Mother Agatha. She stood in the hallway, as though she had been waiting. "You saw him, didn't you?" she whispered. "Gabriel doesn't belong to this side anymore." "What do you mean? Where is he?" She looked toward the chapel. "The mirrors are thin here. That's how they come back to pray." Her eyes, those cold, unblinking eyes, shifted to the crucifix she wore around her neck. For the first time I noticed it hung upside down. I couldn't breathe. I turned to leave, but her voice followed me down the corridor, soft and certain. "Don't look into any more mirrors, Sister Miriam. You might not like who looks back." That night, I covered every mirror in my room with sheets. But before dawn, I woke to the sound of glass cracking. And in the faint reflection of the window, I saw Gabriel's face again, smiling. "Only this time," he whispered, "you're next." Episode 5. The Whispering Confession Booth. The chapel smelled of wax and something older, something that didn't belong to this century. I walked inside with my rosary trembling between my fingers, whispering a prayer that sounded less like faith and more like fear. Since the night Gabriel vanished, I had stopped pretending I understood what St. Aurelia's truly was. The children no longer laughed. They moved through the halls like shadows, learning how to be human. When they spoke, it was in fragments of prayers, pieces of hymns, and sometimes things that weren't scripture at all. That morning, Mother Agatha approached me with her slow, measured grace. "It is time," she said, handing me a small brass key. "The confessional has been waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked. "For you, Sister Miriam." The confessional stood at the far end of the chapel, carved from dark oak, older than the walls themselves. Its doors groaned like an animal in pain as I opened them. The inside smelled of dust and incense and faintly of blood. I sat down, knees pressed together, breath unsteady. The small screen beside me separated my side from the penitents. On the other side, someone was already breathing, slow, heavy. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, I began. Bless me, Father, for I have... A whisper interrupted me. Sinned, my heart stilled. The voice wasn't mine. It came from the other side. Father? I asked, but the breath that followed was childlike, soft, trembling. Forgive me, sister, it whispered. He made us drown. Every hair on my neck stood up. Who made you drown? The priest, the voice said. He said the water would wash our souls clean. But it burned. It burned so much, the screen shuddered. I pressed closer, but all I saw was darkness. Gabriel? I breathed, silence. Then another voice, older, broken. The words came through in a rasp. You should not be here, Miriam. Confession is for the living. The candlelight flickered violently. My breath turned to mist. I pulled the curtain aside, expecting to see an empty seat. But there was someone there. A figure in a tattered cassock sat motionless, face hidden in shadow. His hands, skeletal and pale, clutched a rosary made of teeth. When he looked up, his eyes were hollow pits, dripping black tears that hissed as they hit the floor. I stumbled back, slamming against the wall. Who are you? He smiled. The one who baptized them. Then his voice shifted, becoming dozens of voices, all whispering over one another. The sound was unbearable, a storm of guilt and grief. We begged for air. We begged for light. But he prayed louder. The door burst open behind me. Mother Agatha stood there, calm as ever. You shouldn't listen, sister. Confession is dangerous when heaven stops answering. I looked back. The confessional was empty. Only the echo of the voices lingered, fading into a faint sob. Agatha placed a hand on my shoulder. You see now, don't you? This orphanage doesn't house children. It keeps confessions. That night I heard the whispers again through the walls, thousands of them, murmuring the same prayer in unison. Forgive us. Forgive us. Forgive us. And when I placed my ear to the floor, I realized the voices were rising, from below, from the basement, the place Mother Agatha said didn't exist. Episode 6, The Room of Empty Beds. The following dawn brought no light. The fog outside had thickened into something alive, pale, restless, moving as though it were breathing. Even the bell tower, once visible from my window, had vanished behind it. I hadn't slept again. The whispers from beneath the floor returned at intervals, soft as weeping, then swelling into what sounded like a choir singing underwater. I prayed until my voice cracked, but the air of St. Aurelia's swallowed the words before they reached heaven. By morning, I decided to confront Mother Agatha. What lies below this place? I demanded. Her expression never changed. The foundation, Sister Miriam. Every home is built on something dead. She handed me a set of worn keys and instructed, You will oversee the West Wing today. The children are not to go there. When I asked why, she smiled faintly. Because there are no children there anymore. The West Wing was colder than the rest of the orphanage. The walls wept moisture and the candles refused to stay lit. The corridor led me to a large dormitory door, room 12. My hand hesitated on the key, but something on the other side breathed. The lock clicked open. Inside were 12 beds, each perfectly made. White sheets. Folded blankets, but no signs of life, no toys, no clothes, no dust even. The air smelled of salt water. The silence was wrong, too clean, like the moment before a scream. I took a step forward and froze. The floorboards creaked in rhythm, as if responding to invisible footsteps. And then the indentations began, sheets sinking, one after another, as though unseen bodies were lying down. 12 small hollows formed across the mattresses. Then came the sound, tiny sighs, the faint rustle of fabric, the whisper of a prayer. Angel of God, my guardian dear. The voices of children reciting a bedtime prayer. Yet no one was there. My pulse pounded in my throat. I backed toward the door, but the beds started to move, slowly rocking like boats on a tide. The sound of water filled the room, sloshing against invisible shores. Then I saw it, droplets running down the bed frames, dark and red. The smell of iron filled the air. Something tugged at my habit. I turned, heart hammering. A small handprint appeared on my sleeve, wet and crimson. The voice that followed was barely human. "Sister, we can't wake up." I fled. The door slammed behind me with such force that the crucifix on the wall fell and cracked in half. I ran to find Agatha, but the halls twisted, longer than before, as if the orphanage were shifting its shape to keep me lost. When I finally stumbled into the main corridor, the children were standing there, every one of them, still, silent, staring. "Where were you, Sister Miriam?" one asked. "You weren't supposed to see them." "See who?" I whispered. "The ones who sleep so we can stay." The words struck me cold. So we can stay. That night I locked my door. But sometime after midnight I woke to the sound of soft breathing around my bed. I reached for my lamp, but the flame wouldn't catch. Through the dim gray light I saw them, the outlines of small bodies curled beside me on the floor, beneath the covers, in the chair. Invisible, but there. The room was full. And from somewhere deep in the dark, a child's voice whispered right beside my ear, "Don't take our place, sister." Someone always has to dream for the others to wake. Episode 7. The Baptism That Went Wrong. By the seventh dawn, I no longer trusted the rhythm of the sun. It rose late, pale and trembling, like it too was afraid to touch St. Aurelia's. The walls groaned with every breath of wind, and the air tasted of old smoke, like a memory refusing to fade. The west wing had been sealed again. Mother Agatha ordered me not to return, but she didn't need to. The image of those sinking beds still haunted every corner of my mind. At breakfast, the children recited a new prayer I had never taught them. Their small voices blended in a single monotone chant, "Wash us clean, Father. Let the river remember our names." I asked where they had learned it. Little Clara smiled, too wide, too knowing. "From the ones who drowned, Sister Miriam. They sing it every night." That was when I demanded the truth from Mother Agatha. She took me to the chapel, her candle casting trembling shadows along the stone walls. "You seek answers," she said softly. "Then you must see where their souls were born." We descended a narrow staircase behind the altar, spiraling downward into the belly of the orphanage. The air grew wet and cold. The smell of rot and salt filled my nose. At the bottom was a wooden door, swollen with age, water stains reaching halfway up the frame. "This is where Father Donnellan performed the ritual," she whispered. I stepped inside. The room was circular, lit by candles floating on shallow water that covered the floor. In the center stood a cracked baptismal font. Above it hung a wooden crucifix, charred black, the face of Christ melted away. Mother Agatha's voice was almost reverent. "He believed the children were born cursed. He said their souls could only be cleansed if they drowned in holy water." I stared at her, horrified. "You're saying he—" "Yes," she interrupted. "He baptized them until they stopped breathing. He called it the second birth." My stomach turned. I knelt beside the font. The water was still, but my reflection rippled, distorted, shifting. For a moment I saw not my face, but the faces of children beneath the surface, eyes open, mouths moving in silent screams. I stumbled back. "This is madness. Why hasn't the church intervened?" Mother Agatha smiled faintly. "The church never found us. St. Aurelia's is not on any map." Before I could answer, the candles flickered out one by one. The sound of dripping water grew louder, turning into splashes, then footsteps. Small ones. The surface of the baptismal font began to churn. Pale hands reached up, grasping the rim. One by one, soaked and shivering children rose from the water, their eyes glassy, their lips blue. Clara's voice echoed behind me. "He said if we prayed hard enough, we could breathe again." The children opened their mouths in unison, and water poured out, dark, endless, and cold. I screamed. But Mother Agatha only whispered, "Don't resist. This is their sacrament." The room filled with the sound of rushing water. I felt it rise to my waist, my chest, my throat. When I looked up, the crucifix above the font had turned upside down, dripping thick red tears, and before the water closed over my head, I heard the children's chant one last time. "Wash us clean, Father. Let the river remember our names." When I woke hours later, I was lying in the chapel, soaked to the bone. The staircase behind the altar was gone. Only the scent of wet candles remained, and a dozen small puddles leading toward my room. Episode 8. The Candlelight Procession. The night after the baptism room disappeared, St. Aurelia's fell into an eerie calm. The air no longer smelled of smoke or blood, only of melting wax, sweet, cloying, almost holy. But it was the kind of holiness that made the skin crawl, as if something unclean had learned to wear a saint's perfume. I couldn't sleep. The walls whispered my name in the rhythm of a lullaby, and the floorboards creaked beneath invisible feet. Every sound in this place had learned to imitate life. Then came the bells. 3 slow tolls echoing through the corridors. They shouldn't have rung. It wasn't dawn, and the bell rope had rotted years ago. I stepped into the hallway, lantern in hand, and that's when I saw them, the children. They walked in a perfect line down the corridor, each holding a candle. The flames burned a cold blue, their light quivering like breath on glass. Their faces were blank, eyes half closed, as if they were dreaming while awake. I called out, "Children, what are you doing?" Not one turned. Not one even blinked. Their small feet moved soundlessly across the floor, leaving wet prints behind. The wax from their candles didn't drip. It floated upward, defying gravity, forming tiny stars in the air above their heads. Curiosity, or perhaps madness, drove me to follow. The procession wound through halls I didn't recognize, turning corners that shouldn't have existed. The orphanage was growing again, stretching its own architecture like flesh rearranging over bone. The air thickened with incense. The children stopped at a locked door at the end of a narrow passage. It was made of iron, its hinges fused by age, and faint light bled from underneath. Little Clara stepped forward. Her voice was calm, almost sacred. "We walk for those who sleep." Then she turned the knob, and the door, locked for decades, opened without sound. Inside was a chapel, smaller than the one above, but infinitely older. The air shimmered with warmth, though no fire burned. Rows of candles lit themselves as the children entered, forming a circle around the altar. On the altar lay a body. It was covered with a white sheet, but I knew that form. Slender, still, familiar. I stepped closer and saw my own face beneath the cloth. The breath in my chest froze. My knees nearly gave out. I reached for the corpse, but before my fingers touched it, Gabriel appeared at my side, his skin pale as candlelight. "You died, sister," he whispered. "You just forgot." "No," I gasped. "That's impossible." He tilted his head. "This is the night we all remember who we were." The candles flared violently, flames bending toward me like reaching hands. The air filled with whispers, hundreds of voices praying and crying all at once. Let the light guide the lost. Let the dead remember their names. Then one by one, the children's candles began to die, each extinguished by an invisible breath. As the darkness closed in, I saw Mother Agatha standing behind the altar, her face serene, her eyes glistening with tears of wax. "This is your procession, Sister Miriam," she said softly. "Your soul's been walking it since the day you drowned." The final candle went out. For a heartbeat, there was only darkness. Then the light beneath the door returned, brighter than ever, pulsing like a heartbeat, and I understood. The procession wasn't leading to salvation. It was leading back to the water, back to where it all began. Episode 9. Letters from the outside morning came like a lie. Golden light spilled through the fogged windows of St. Aurelia's, warm and soft, but it did not touch the cold inside me. I had seen my own body lying on the altar the night before. I had heard Gabriel's words, "You died, sister." And yet here I was, breathing, moving, praying, or pretending to. I told myself it must have been a dream, one of the cruel visions this place liked to conjure. But then I found the letters. They were waiting on my desk when I returned to my room. Dozens of envelopes, yellowed and frayed at the edges, bound with a rosary that had rusted into the paper. Each one bore the same name, written in the same neat, fading hand, Sister Miriam Clark. My name. The first letter trembled in my hands as I opened it. To whoever reads this, or whoever I used to be, the orphanage changes the order of things. It hides the years between prayers. I arrived in 1894, or perhaps 1923. I can't tell anymore. The children do not age. Neither do I. The gates open only for the living, and we are not that. My breath caught. The ink was smeared with what looked like water stains, or tears. I opened another. I tried to leave last winter. The gates laughed. I heard them creak with voices, whispering my own prayers back to me. I fear St. Aurelius remembers me better than God does. The third letter was shorter, frantic. The priest comes at night now. He says he cannot rest until we remember our sins. He carries water that burns the skin. I hear bells that no one rings. If you read this, Miriam, run. But I know you won't. We never do. The letters fell from my hands like dead leaves. My pulse thundered in my ears. There was no doubt. Each one was in my handwriting. When I rushed to find Mother Agatha, she was in the chapel, polishing the melted crucifix with deliberate care. She didn't look up when I demanded answers. "How many times have I been here?" I cried. "How many Miriams has this place devoured?" Her reflection in the broken glass of the altar smiled faintly. "Enough to fill heaven if heaven would have us." I felt anger rise inside me. "I am leaving." "You already have," she said simply. "Many times." The chapel bell rang then, one deep echoing toll that vibrated through the floor. And from the walls the portraits began to stir. The painted eyes blinked. The children in the frames moved their lips as if speaking through layers of varnish. One whisper rose above the rest. "Check the post again." I turned back toward my room. The letters were no longer scattered. They were neatly stacked, sealed again. On top was a fresh envelope, the ink still wet. With shaking fingers, I tore it open. "Dearest Sister Miriam, you are close now. The truth hides behind the year you never lived. When the next letter arrives, it will be from me, but older. Or younger. You'll know. Until then, keep your faith and your distance from the mirror. Yours always, Sister Miriam Clark." Outside, the fog thickened, pressing against the windows like something alive, and somewhere deep within it, I heard the creak of a carriage wheel, followed by a bell tolling 3 times. The same sound I'd heard the night I first arrived, only this time, I knew what it meant. Another me was coming. Episode 10, The Choir of the Damned. The sound reached me before the morning did, a soft hum rising from the walls, the way air vibrates before a storm. I sat up in bed, heart hammering, realizing it wasn't thunder. It was singing, faint, eerie, and heartbreakingly beautiful. The children's voices. They were singing in Latin, but not the kind taught in convents. The words bent wrong in the mouth, too fluid, too ancient, like something whispered before language itself was born. When I entered the chapel, they were already assembled. 20 children stood in perfect rows beneath the broken stained glass window, their faces tilted upward toward the empty cross. Candlelight flickered across their pale skin, casting shadows that danced independently from their bodies. Mother Agatha stood before them, conducting with her rosary. Her eyes were closed, her lips moving with the same silent rhythm as the children. "Mother," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What are they singing?" She didn't answer. I moved closer. The words became clearer, fragments of the Book of Enoch, passages that should never be recited aloud. They sang of watchers who fell, of children born without souls, of a heaven that turned its face away. The air thickened. The candles flared blue. "Stop this," I said. "They're just children." Agatha opened her eyes. They glowed faintly like light behind frost. "No, Sister Miriam," she said softly. "They're the echoes of children, the choir of those who were drowned." The hymn rose higher, sharper. The stained glass began to tremble, cracks spiderwebbing through the angels' faces. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it was inside me now, their voices filling every hollow in my skull. I saw flashes, the baptism gone wrong. Water rising, children clawing for air, the priest praying louder than their screams. Then, a blinding light. The moment death swallowed them whole. When I opened my eyes, I was on my knees. My nose was bleeding. The singing had stopped. The children stared at me motionless, their mouths still open mid-hymn. Their eyes were no longer their own. They were black, void, endless. One of them, Clara, stepped forward. "He hears us now," she whispered. "The one who lives beneath." Mother Agatha smiled faintly, her face serene as marble. "He requires an offering, sister." The hymn was the call. Now the gate is open. "Who?" I demanded. "Who have you summoned?" Agatha lifted her gaze to the window. Outside, the fog had turned crimson. Shadows moved within it, tall, thin shapes dragging chains, faceless and slow. "The priest," she said. "The first servant of St. Aurelia's. He has come to finish his prayer." The bell tower groaned. A deep rumble shook the floor. One by one, the candles went out. The last light came from the shattered glass. where the figure of an angel now wept real tears of blood, and through that blood-colored light, a silhouette appeared at the chapel door. A man in a decayed cassock, his collar still white as bone. He carried a bucket of water that smoked where it dripped. His voice was calm, familiar. "Sister Miriam," he said, "you missed your baptism." The children bowed their heads. Mother Agatha fell to her knees, and as the priest raised his hand in blessing, I realized with horror he had no reflection in the broken glass behind him, only mine, and I was smiling. Episode 11. The Priest Who Never Ages. The next morning began in silence, an unnatural silence, the kind that hums in your bones and dares you to breathe. Not a bird sang, not a clock ticked. Even the fog outside hung motionless, frozen mid-swirl like something afraid to move. The priest's arrival had changed everything. He stood in the courtyard at dawn, blessing the air with water that smoked as it touched the stones. The children watched him from the windows, faces pressed against the glass, their eyes wide and empty. I watched too, because I knew that face. I'd seen it in the faded photographs in the archives of St. Aurelia's, taken decades, no, centuries apart. Always the same pale eyes, the same thin lips, the same cruel serenity. Father Donnellan. Only he hadn't aged a day. When I confronted Mother Agatha, she didn't look surprised. "He never left," she said simply. "St. Aurelia's does not let its shepherds abandon their flock." "Then what is he?" I asked. Her smile was faint and chilling. "A priest who forgot which side of heaven he served." That evening he held Mass for the first time in years. The children were gathered in the chapel, rows of small bodies trembling in candlelight. I sat among them, my heartbeat drowning beneath the low drone of his voice. "Faith," he said, "is not love. Faith is obedience." The air smelled of iron and incense. He dipped his hand into the baptismal bowl, now filled with black water, and sprinkled it over the congregation. Each droplet hissed when it touched skin. The children didn't flinch, they only smiled. I tried to stand, but something pressed me down. The pew beneath my hands felt warm, as if pulsing. When I looked closer, I realized the wood was breathing, stretching like ribs beneath a chest. Father Donnellan's gaze met mine. "You came back," he said softly, as if greeting an old friend. "You always do." "I don't know you," I managed to whisper. "Oh, but you do. You were the first I baptized." The candles flared white. The sound of water roared in my ears, and suddenly I was somewhere else. Years ago, or perhaps years ahead. I saw myself kneeling before him, young, frightened, drowning in a font that overflowed with dark water. I saw my mouth open to scream, but no sound came, only bubbles and prayers. Then his voice brought me back. "We are eternal here, sister. The flesh rots, but the vow remains. That is why we never age." I stumbled to my feet, my rosary slipping from my hands. "You're not a priest," I said. "You're something that feeds on faith." He laughed, softly, pityingly. "And you, dear Miriam, feed on guilt. That's why you always return. The orphanage calls you because you built it." The words struck like a blade. "What are you saying?" He stepped closer, the candlelight revealing the faint outline of burn marks across his collar, like fingers that had once tried to choke him. "This place began with your prayers," he whispered. "You asked God to make you guardian of lost souls. He did. He just forgot to tell you what the price would be." The walls groaned. The crucifix began to twist, wood splintering. One by one, the children rose and turned toward me. "She's the reason we stay," Clara said. "She keeps the gates closed." I backed away, trembling. "No, I tried to save you." "By drowning us?" the priest asked gently. The candles extinguished. Only his voice remained, low, calm, endless. "You are not the visitor here, Sister Miriam. You are the relic, and relics don't leave." When I finally reached my room, dawn was already bleeding through the fog. My hands shook as I lifted the small mirror on my desk. The reflection showed Father Donnellan standing behind me, smiling, and as I turned in horror, he wasn't there, only the faint scent of baptismal water, and a whisper that lingered in the air. "Confession awaits, my child. Eternity is patient." Episode 12. The Basement of Unfinished Prayers. Sleep abandoned me completely after that night. Even when I closed my eyes, I could still see him, Father Donnellan, standing behind my reflection, lips curved in that patient, knowing smile. Every shadow seemed to hum with the echo of his voice. You built this place. The words refused to fade. By morning, I was trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. If St. Aurelia's was built upon my prayers, then perhaps it could be unmade by them too. I just had to find where it began. Mother Agatha had forbidden me from the basement, but the orphanage itself seemed to guide me there. The corridors twisted into new patterns, doors opening where walls should have been. I followed the faint sound of whispering, hundreds of voices praying out of sync, each ending their plea mid-word. When I reached the staircase, the air changed. The smell of damp stone was sharp, metallic. My lantern flickered as though resisting what waited below. The steps led down into an enormous chamber carved directly into the earth. Candles lined the walls, though none had flames, yet they glowed faintly, feeding on a light that had no source. Then I saw them. Dolls, hundreds of them, nailed to the walls in perfect rows. Each was dressed in a small orphan's uniform. Each had a name carved into its porcelain chest. I moved closer, my breath shallow. Clara, Gabriel, Thomas, every name I had ever heard in this orphanage. And then, at the far end of the chamber, one doll stood apart from the rest, taller, older, with the same rosary that hung around my own neck. The name carved into it read, Miriam Clark. My knees weakened. The candlelight pulsed once, as if the room were breathing. A sound rose behind me, a low, rhythmic chanting. I turned. The children were standing at the base of the stairs, eyes dark, hands clasped in prayer. Mother Agatha descended slowly behind them, her expression serene. "You shouldn't have come here," she said softly. "This is where we keep what God refused to finish." "What are they?" I whispered, pointing at the dolls. "The prayers that never reached heaven," she said. "Each child you tried to save, each soul you begged for, remains here. Every unanswered plea has weight, sister. You built this crypt out of your faith." "I never wanted this," I said, stepping back. "I only wanted to help them." "And you did," she said, her voice almost tender. "You gave them eternity." The air grew heavy. The dolls' eyes began to glow one by one, filling the chamber with pale light. Their tiny mouths opened in unison, whispering the same fragmented phrase, "Amen. Amen. Amen." I felt something tugging at my hand. Gabriel stood beside me, his face expressionless. "It's time to finish the last prayer," he said. "What prayer?" He pointed toward my doll, the one bearing my name. Its porcelain lips were cracked, frozen mid-word. I moved closer and saw a folded scrap of parchment nailed beneath it. My own handwriting. "Lord, if they cannot rest, let me stay in their place." The paper burst into flame. The dolls began to scream, high, shrill, mechanical, like the sound of glass shattering under pressure. Mother Agatha spread her arms wide. "You prayed it, Miriam. You made the vow. The orphanage was your answer." The walls shook. Wax melted from invisible candles running down like tears. I ran toward the stairs, but the children blocked my path. "You can't leave," Clara whispered. "If you go, who will remember us?" The light flickered violently, swallowing everything in white. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the basement. I was kneeling in the chapel, the dawn bell tolling. My hands were blistered with burns, and the smell of smoke lingered in the air. The other sisters moved calmly around me, as though nothing had happened. Mother Agatha passed by, her eyes cold and knowing. "Good morning, Sister Miriam," she said. "The children are waiting for their lessons." Behind her, I saw them, lined neatly in their pews, silent, smiling, and in the candlelight, I noticed something new. Each child wore a small porcelain pendant around their neck, tiny, cracked faces carved from the dolls in the basement. Each one whispered as I passed, "Finish the prayer." Episode 13, The Fire That Never Ended. By now, St. Aurelia's no longer felt like a place. It breathed like a living thing. The walls pulsed with memory. The air trembled with the weight of unfinished prayers, and every corner seemed to whisper, "Welcome home, Sister Miriam." But I wasn't home. I was in something's body. The nightmares began after the basement. Each night I dreamed of smoke, the smell of it, thick and oily, clinging to my throat. I saw the orphanage burning, flames crawling up the crucifix, children standing silently in the inferno, their faces calm as ash consumed them. And through the roaring fire I always heard the same voice whisper, "You didn't save us. You built the pyre." When I awoke, the smell of smoke lingered, real and heavy. My sheets were warm to the touch. My candle, though unlit, dripped wax as if it had been burning all night. That morning, I went to the archives, what remained of them. Half the shelves were rotted, the records warped from age or moisture. But one book caught my eye. Its leather cover cracked and blackened as if it had survived a fire. St. Aurelia's Orphanage, 1913. The same year the fire had supposedly destroyed this place. Inside, the ink had bled into the pages, but I could still make out fragments. Blaze began in the chapel. All souls lost. One survivor found among the ruins, young nun, name unknown. My hand shook. I turned the page, and there, pressed flat between the paper, was a lock of hair, dark, brittle, and smelling faintly of smoke. Beneath it, written in the margins, she prayed for their souls. The Lord answered with fire. I dropped the book. Outside, the bells began to ring, slow, uneven, as though someone were pulling the rope with trembling hands. But when I reached the courtyard, the rope was still. The bell tower itself was on fire. Flames licked the windows, golden tongues curling through the fog. The children gathered below, watching silently. None of them screamed. None of them moved. Their eyes reflected the fire like mirrors. "Get back," I shouted. "We have to leave." But Mother Agatha only smiled from the chapel steps, the glow of the inferno flickering across her face. "Leave," she murmured. "My dear sister, we've been burning for over a century." The fire spread faster than wind. Smoke filled the halls. I ran, coughing, but the orphanage seemed to twist and fold, hallways looping back on themselves. Doors opened into rooms I'd never seen, rooms filled with charred furniture, blackened toys, and walls streaked with soot. I heard footsteps behind me, small, bare feet slapping against the wood. I turned and saw Gabriel standing unharmed amid the flames. His eyes glowed with ember light. "You started it," he said softly. I shook my head, choking on smoke. "No, I tried to save you." He stepped closer, his outline flickering like a reflection in water. "You prayed for purification. You asked him to cleanse the sin. He heard you, sister. The fire never ended because your prayer never stopped." The walls groaned. The heat seared my skin. I reached for him, but my hand passed through smoke. Then, through the roaring, I heard the organ playing, a hymn twisting itself into a scream. The same melody from the choir's cursed mass. Only this time the voice singing was mine. I stumbled into the chapel. The ceiling was collapsing, beams glowing red. At the altar, the crucifix burned from within, light bleeding out of its hollow eyes. And beneath it I saw myself again, kneeling in flames. Hands clasped in prayer, lips moving. The other me whispered one word over and over, "Aurelia." The fire consumed everything then, light, sound, pain. And for a moment there was nothing. Only silence. When I opened my eyes, the fire was gone. The orphanage stood untouched. The sky outside was gray and still, but every candle burned with a steady orange flame, and none cast a shadow. Mother Agatha entered quietly, her voice soft as ever. "You survived it again, sister." "You always do." She placed a blackened crucifix in my hands. Its metal was warm. "This time," she said, "perhaps you'll remember why you prayed for fire." And as I stared at the crucifix, I saw it, tiny reflections within the metal, flames still burning, trapped inside, waiting to be set free. Episode 14, The Child Who Remembers Everything. The morning after the fire that wasn't a fire, St. Aurelia's felt too quiet, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to remember something it already knew. The air was thick with the scent of old ashes. Even though no flame had touched the walls, soot lingered in the corners, as though the orphanage itself exhaled smoke from an ancient wound. The children were different too. They no longer sang. They simply watched me, 20 pairs of hollow eyes following every step I took. Their silence was heavier than any prayer. Then Gabriel returned. He appeared in the doorway of the classroom while I was pretending to teach. His skin pale as candle wax, his curls still damp as if he'd just risen from water. The other children didn't look at him. They acted as though he didn't exist. "Gabriel," I whispered, my heart caught in my throat. "Where have you been?" He smiled faintly. "Nowhere. Everywhere. The same place you go when you close your eyes." I tried to touch him, but the air around him bent like heat, shimmering with an invisible current. "Why did you come back?" His gaze drifted toward the window, where the fog pressed like a living thing. "Because I remember, sister. I remember everything." He turned to me then, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for me. "You weren't sent here," he said. "You were born here." The words struck me like a blow. "That's not possible." "You were the first," he interrupted. "Before the orphans, before the fire, you prayed for a place where lost souls could be safe, and heaven gave you this. Saint Aurelia's is your prayer made flesh." I stumbled back. "No, I couldn't have." But memories began to surface, flashes of faces, flames, the sound of drowning prayers, my own voice whispering, "If I can't save them in life, let me hold them in death." Gabriel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden toy, a rosary cross carved crudely from oak. "You gave me this the night you built the orphanage," he said. "You told me the gates would open when every child was at peace." My hands trembled as I took it. The wood was warm, alive with a faint pulse. "And why haven't they?" He looked at me with pity that felt older than time. "Because you're the one who can't let go." Outside, the chapel bells began to toll, though no one had climbed the tower. The sound vibrated through the walls, deep and mournful. The children stood all at once and turned toward me. "Mother Miriam," they whispered. The title chilled me. No, I'm not your mother." But their voices overlapped, forming a single haunting note. "You are now. You always have been." The floorboards began to split. Smoke leaked through the cracks, and beneath it, water, dark and endless, rising slowly as if the earth itself remembered drowning. Gabriel stepped closer, pressing the wooden cross into my hand. "You can still end it. Say the words you said that night." "What words?" His eyes glistened. "You know them?" The water rose to my knees, carrying reflections that weren't real. The children burning, the priest laughing. My own face submerged in prayer. "I can't," I whispered. "You must." I closed my eyes. The words came unbidden, carved into my soul. "Let this house of mercy burn until it forgets my name. Let the lost find peace even if I never do." The moment I spoke, the walls shook violently. The portraits caught fire. The crucifixes screamed as metal warped, and the children's faces filled with light, beautiful, blinding light. Gabriel smiled through the chaos. "You've remembered." Then he stepped backward into the rising water and vanished beneath it. When the flames died, I was alone. The orphanage was silent. Outside, for the first time, I saw sunlight, real, golden and pure, touch the gates. I ran to them, tears burning down my face. The iron bars creaked open, groaning like an old heart breaking, and just as I stepped across the threshold, a voice behind me whispered, soft and familiar, Mother Agatha's. "Be careful, Sister Miriam." Every prayer leaves a shadow. I turned. The orphanage was gone. Only a field of scorched earth remained, and on that blackened ground stood a single child, Gabriel, holding the same wooden cross, smiling sadly as the fog began to roll in again. Episode 15, The Orphanage That Breathes. The gates stood open behind me, groaning in the wind like a final breath, but I couldn't move. The air outside St. Aurelia's shimmered with sunlight, yes, but it felt wrong, as though the world beyond was too still, too bright, too clean to be real. I should have felt freedom. Instead, I felt absence, like stepping out of my own skin. When I turned back, the orphanage was gone. Only smoke coiled upward from the blackened field where it once stood, vanishing into the pale sky. Yet as I stared longer, the air began to ripple. The outline of the building bled back into existence, walls forming from mist, windows breathing light in and out like lungs. The orphanage was rebuilding itself. A voice drifted through the fog, soft and familiar. "You can't destroy what was born of prayer, sister." I froze. Mother Agatha stepped out from the haze, her robes untouched by ash. Her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting a light that wasn't the sun. "It's over," I said. "The children are free." "Free?" She tilted her head. "No, child. They were never prisoners. They were memories, your memories. Fragments of the souls you tried to save. St. Aurelia's lives as long as you do." I took a step back. "Then let it die with me." Agatha smiled, sad, almost loving. "That's the one thing it cannot do. You gave it eternity." The ground trembled beneath us. The ruins began to pulse, walls reforming in slow, dreadful rhythm. Windows blinked open like eyes. The air filled with the sound of quiet breathing, the sound of the orphanage inhaling. From within, faint voices rose, a lullaby sung off-key, the same one I'd heard the first night I arrived. The melody twisted around me, pulling me toward the gates, and there, framed in the doorway of the half-formed building, stood Gabriel. He looked unchanged, no older, no younger, his face serene. "You shouldn't have left," he said softly. "It's lonely when you're gone." My throat tightened. "I saw you freed. I saw you vanish." He shook his head. "You saw what you needed to, but we were never meant to leave you. We are you, the part that never forgives, the part that keeps praying even when God has stopped listening." Behind him, the children appeared, one by one, pale silhouettes glowing in the fog. Their lips moved in unison. "Come home, Mother." I stumbled backward, shaking my head. No, I ended this. I spoke the final prayer." Gabriel stepped closer, and the air around him flickered, bending reality like heat over a grave. "There's no final prayer, sister. There's only the breath between one and the next." The ground split open, revealing the basement again, the chamber of dolls, unburned, pristine. Their porcelain eyes turned toward me. Each one began whispering a fragment of the same phrase. "Finish the prayer." "Finish the prayer," Agatha's voice echoed through the smoke. "You cannot destroy St. Aurelia's, because St. Aurelia's was built to keep you alive. Every soul you saved keeps breathing through its walls. Every regret you buried beats like a heart beneath its floors." The fog coiled around me, cold and alive. I dropped to my knees, clutching the wooden cross Gabriel had given me. It pulsed in my palm like a heartbeat. "Then tell me how to stop it." Gabriel smiled sadly. "Breathe with it." One last time, the orphanage inhaled. So did I. And in that moment, everything, the children, the priest, the flames, the prayers, merged into a single breath. I felt it fill me, stretch me, devour me, and then release. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in the chapel again. Everything was new, bright, untouched. Children's laughter echoed through the halls, soft and pure. A young nun entered, her habit crisp, her face unfamiliar. She smiled kindly. "Welcome to St. Aurelia's, Sister Miriam. Mother Agatha's been expecting you." I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. Somewhere deep inside the walls, the orphanage exhaled, slow, content, alive, and I understood. No one ever left St. Aurelia's, not even me. Episode 16, The Requiem of the Forgotten Nuns. When I awoke, the morning light slanted through the chapel windows like a benediction, soft, golden, merciful. But I no longer trusted the light. It was too pure for this place. Light in St. Aurelia's never came without a purpose. I was back again, alive again, or something close enough to it. The same walls, the same echoes, the same heartbeat in the floors. Only the faces had changed. The young nun who had greeted me smiled politely as she arranged flowers near the altar. "It's such an honor to meet you, Sister Miriam," she said. "Mother Agatha said you would help us tend to the relics." Her words twisted like a blade in my gut. "Relics?" I asked. She nodded toward the chapel's far end, where the candlelight wavered over a glass cabinet. Inside were rows of rosaries, habits, and veils, blackened, brittle, coated with a thin layer of dust. "They belonged to the first sisters," she said. "The ones who built St. Aurelia's?" I stepped closer, my breath fogging the glass. There were 12 sets in total, each arranged with reverence. The last one, however, had a small placard beneath it. The inscription made my blood run cold. "Sister Miriam Clark, guardian of the unbaptized." The young nun looked up, confused by my silence. "Isn't it beautiful? They say your name was chosen to honor her, the sister who gave her soul so the children could be saved." My voice caught. "I think there's been a mistake." But even as I said it, I knew there wasn't. This was the cycle. Every rebirth began with memory disguised as service. Each new sister became me. That night, unable to rest, I wandered the hallways. The orphanage was quieter than ever, as if it were listening. The air smelled of incense and rain. As I passed the chapel door, I heard faint chanting. I pushed it open and froze. 12 figures knelt before the altar, draped in habits older than time. Their faces were hidden, their voices low and mournful. The air shimmered around them like heat. "Who are you?" I whispered. The nearest nun lifted her veil. Her skin was gray as candle wax, her eyes hollow but glinting faintly with recognition. "We are the first," she said. "The ones who prayed St. Aurelia's into being." The others raised their heads, and I saw my own face reflected again and again. Aged, burned, drowned, buried, yet always me. I staggered back. No, this isn't possible." The lead sister, myself, smiled with pity. "You asked to bear their suffering. You begged God for endless mercy. He granted it, an eternity of it. Why?" I gasped. Why would he answer such a prayer? "Because mercy and damnation share the same breath." The air thickened. The other nuns began to hum, a slow, solemn melody that made the candles tremble. The ground beneath my feet vibrated like a pulse. The song built, voices merging until the words became clear. "Forgive the mother of lost souls. Forgive the prayer that built the cage." The walls began to bleed light, bright, searing, divine. I covered my eyes, but the radiance pierced through. The 12 figures glowed, their bodies unraveling into ash and light. When it was over, only one habit remained on the chapel floor. Mine. A faint voice whispered through the silence, a final vow carried by wind. "Every prayer births another sister. Every mercy demands a keeper." I sank to my knees trembling. The light faded, but the sound lingered, the echo of the requiem still vibrating in the bones of the orphanage. And then, from the darkness beyond the altar, a single child's voice rose. "It was Gabriel's, Mother," he said gently. "They're waiting for your next hymn." As I looked up, I saw them, the children gathering again, candlelight flickering in their hollow eyes. St. Aurelia's was ready to breathe once more. Episode 17, The Trial of Souls. The next morning, a strange stillness wrapped itself around St. Aurelia's. The fog that usually blanketed the grounds had thinned, revealing the skeletal trees that surrounded the orphanage like sentinels. For the first time, I could see beyond the gates, but something inside me whispered not to look too long. The world outside was shimmering, fragile, unreal, as though made of glass that might shatter if I dared to step through. The chapel bell rang once, long and hollow. It wasn't the sound of summoning. It was the sound of judgment. When I entered the chapel, the air was dense with incense, but beneath it lay another scent, iron and dust, like blood on ancient stone. The pews were gone. In their place stood 12 empty chairs, arranged in a perfect circle. The children sat behind them, silent as witnesses. At the center of the circle, a single candle burned with a blue flame that did not flicker. Mother Agatha waited there, hands folded neatly before her. Her expression was calm, almost tender. "It's time, Sister Miriam," she said. "The orphanage remembers, and so must you." "Remembers what?" I asked, my voice raw. "Your judgment." The candle's flame swelled, growing taller, stretching into a column of light. And from within it, figures began to emerge, translucent, half-formed, yet unmistakable. The drowned children, the burned, the forgotten, the sisters who came before, and at last, Father Donnellan. He stepped forward, his cassock scorched, his eyes like hollow wells. "You prayed for salvation," he said. "But every prayer has a cost. You asked heaven to take the lost, and when heaven refused, you built your own." The light pulsed. The room darkened. The 12 chairs filled one by one with my past selves, each one a reflection of who I had been. The weeping novice, the burning martyr, the drowned guardian, the penitent whisperer. They spoke in unison. "Miriam Clark, you stand before the souls you bound in faith. What say you for your sins?" My mouth went dry. "I tried to save them," I whispered. The first Miriam, her face pale, eyes ringed with ash, stood. "You prayed for a sanctuary." The second, her hair still wet from the river, rose next. "You promised them peace." The third, the one who carried the fire in her hands, lifted her chin. "But you never asked if they wanted to stay." Their voices layered atop one another until they became a single thunderous sound. "You made the orphanage, and in it, you made us." The candlelight dimmed. Shadows surged, forming a void between us. And in that void, I heard the soft laughter of children, followed by a voice far older, far deeper, a voice that was neither God nor man. "Mercy is not forgiveness," it said. It is ownership. I fell to my knees, clutching the rosary that had followed me through every death, every rebirth. If I am to be punished, I said, let it be me alone. Let them go. The voice rumbled through the walls, shaking the orphanage to its foundation. Then you must unmake what you created. You must open the gates not with prayer, but with surrender. Mother Agatha stepped forward, her eyes glistening with tears. Do you understand now, my child? The trial is not theirs. It's yours. The candlelight surged once more, blinding me. When the brilliance faded, the chapel was empty. No children, no chairs, no Agatha. Only me, kneeling before the altar, clutching the rosary so tightly that blood seeped from my palms. A single whisper lingered in the air, fading like the last note of a requiem. To free the souls, you must remember the prayer that closed the gates, and speak it backward. Outside, thunder cracked across a sky with no clouds. The walls groaned, alive again, listening, and somewhere deep beneath the orphanage, I heard the first door begin to open. Episode 18. The Last Liturgy. The night after the trial, St. Aurelia's no longer slept. The walls breathed with me, the floors beat with my pulse, and the air quivered under a silence so profound it felt like the pause before creation itself. The children were gone, or perhaps finally still. Only the echo of their laughter drifted through the corridors like fading incense. I wandered the orphanage barefoot, my rosary dragging along the floor like a chain. Every step seemed to draw whispers from the wood. Sister Miriam, Mother, Savior, Sinner. The words shifted depending on how much faith I had left. The gates stood open now. Beyond them stretched not the world, but a horizon of colorless mist, endless and waiting. Freedom, or its illusion. But before I could leave, I had to finish what I had begun. The orphanage pulsed faintly, as though listening. You know what must be done, a voice murmured. It was Agatha's, but softer, stripped of authority. Every house of God demands its final mass. In the chapel, the altar was already prepared. 12 candles, one for every soul bound by my prayer, burned in a perfect circle around the baptismal font. Above them, the crucifix had turned black with soot, its edges glowing faintly, as though remembering the fire. And there he was again, Father Donnellan, waiting. The same thin smile, the same hands folded in eternal patience. You've come to end your creation, he said. Do you truly think you can undo a prayer whispered in God's absence? I'm not asking anymore, I said. I'm taking it back. He laughed, the sound hollow, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Then you must speak the unprayer, sister. The words that unmake faith itself. I stepped closer to the altar. Then teach me, he shook his head. No one can teach what was born from your own tongue. The flame nearest to me flickered, and suddenly I remembered. The first night I prayed for the lost. The water, the crying, the silence that followed. The prayer had not been a plea. It had been a command. Lord, let no soul be cast into darkness. Bind them here in mercy until I can free them. I had sealed them myself. Now the only way to free them was to release me. I lifted the rosary from my neck. The beads were slick with my blood from the trial. I laid it on the altar, and the candles flared white, their flames twisting into shapes of children, flickering outlines of all I'd imprisoned. They began to hum, a single, mournful note that grew into a hymn, the same hymn they had sung on the night of the drowning. I whispered the prayer backward. Until I can free them. Bind them here in mercy. Cast no soul into darkness. Lord, the moment the last word left my lips, the orphanage screamed. The air shattered into light. The candles exploded, scattering sparks that hovered in the air like tiny souls breaking open. Father Donnellan's face split into shadow. His voice rose into a roar. You've doomed yourself! I was never meant to be saved, I whispered. The floor collapsed beneath me, revealing the dark water of the baptismal chamber below. I fell, weightless, breathless, unafraid. The water swallowed me whole, and for the first time, it wasn't cold. It was warm, forgiving. Voices surrounded me, not accusing this time, but singing. The children, the nuns, even Agatha. A chorus of peace, of final release. The orphanage trembled one last time above me and then exhaled. When I opened my eyes, I was standing on a shore bathed in golden light. No fog, no walls, just the sound of gentle waves and laughter, real laughter carried by the wind. Gabriel was there, smiling, holding out his hand. "It's done," he said. Behind him, the orphanage stood far away, its form fading like smoke at sunrise. "What happens now?" I asked. He tilted his head. "Now we rest, and St. Aurelia's sleeps." As the light washed over us, I looked down at my hands. They were clean. The rosary was gone. The scars were gone. For the first time in an eternity, I breathed, and it was mine. The orphanage sighed one last time, a sound like a lullaby carried into heaven. And then, at last, it stopped breathing.
Epilogue: the bell that tolled for mercy the world forgot about. St. Aurelius, the last stone sank beneath the marshland where the orphanage once stood, and spring covered the ruins with wildflowers, white, fragile, almost holy. Travelers who passed that way said the ground was warm, even in winter, and that if you stood there long enough, you could hear children humming under the soil. 50 years later, the church rebuilt a chapel on that land. The blueprints said St. Aurelia's home for the lost, a sanctuary for orphans again. No one questioned the name. History, like faith, has a way of repeating itself when memory sleeps. On the morning of its consecration, a young priest arrived from Rome, Father Elias Marin, 27, bright-eyed, full of scripture. He was chosen for his compassion. He was told the place needed a gentle soul. The chapel bell rang once when he crossed the threshold. Only once. The workers swore they hadn't installed the clapper yet. Inside, the air smelled faintly of salt water and ash. The pews were new, the walls unblemished, but the silence was ancient. Father Elias ran his hand across the altar. Beneath the polish, he felt something carved deep into the wood. "Lord, let no soul be cast into darkness." That night, as he unpacked his things, he found a small wooden cross in the drawer of his desk. It was old, its grain smooth from years of touch. A single word was burned into the back: Miriam. He kept it with him when he prayed. The weeks passed. The children filled the halls with laughter again. But sometimes, in the early hours before dawn, Father Elias would wake to the sound of footsteps outside his door, bare light, and many. He would hear a woman's voice whispering lullabies in a language older than Latin. The air would grow warm, and the scent of candle wax would bloom in the dark. One evening, while preparing the baptismal font, he noticed the water trembling, though no wind stirred. His reflection shifted. For a moment, it wasn't his own face staring back, it was hers. Sister Miriam Clark. Her eyes were calm, sad, and filled with a kind of mercy that burned. She spoke, not aloud, but within him. "Keep the gates open, Father. Let them come and go. Do not bind them again." Then she smiled, and the water stilled. The next morning, he found the bell rope swinging gently, though the air was still. It tolled once clear, soft, forgiving. From that day on, St. Aurelius never locked its doors. No one spoke of miracles, though sometimes children said a kind lady in white tucked them in at night. And when Father Elias grew old, he would tell the new sisters that faith is not about saving souls, it is about setting them free. In the marsh outside, among the flowers, stood a weathered stone cross, no name, only an inscription worn by time. Mercy never dies, it only changes its keeper. Far beneath the earth, where the foundations once lay, the orphanage exhaled one last time, slow, gentle, almost grateful, and the bell tolled again, for mercy, for memory, for Miriam.